And here we go. We'll see people starting to enter. Here we are. So, yes. Varsha, there's an amazing symmetry to your background too, which I haven't commented on as well. So, I mean, you know, your head is perfectly framed between, you know, the images on the one side and the books on the other, and then the liquor in the middle. So, yes.
And the liquor, yeah.
And the liquor. And the liquor in the middle, yeah.
Yeah. One day I'll figure out a way to move my table so I can put all my records on this side too. So just my whole obsession can be viewed to people who are having me teach for them this semester, and they can just see everything.
Do you have a big vinyl collection? Sorry.
I do have a big vinyl collection. Let's share with people. If you can see, can you see?
Oh.
Yep.
Very nice. I have 8 rows of vinyl. Yeah, it's fun.
That's
I mainly
impressive.
it's like the best way to relax after a long ass day of grad school. So that's sort of how I got into it. I was actually talking to people on Twitter today to ask them what the best cover of a Bob Dylan song was. Basically, everyone was like Jimi Hendrix, obviously, but it was a really fun conversation to sort of like get into music. So I think that's one of the fun things about teaching. When I teach the second half of the U.S. History Survey, basically bring in a new song every week. I have my students talk about Vietnam War protest songs when we get to the Vietnam War. It's so much fun.
Oh, we should talk about songs.
We should talk about songs, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Kitty Wayne Shepherd Band, Everything is Broken. That's the best cover.
I mean, we could just argue about that for an hour if you want. I mean, the best covers, the Dylan cover. I mean, I think we could probably fill up an hour easily on that. So, but if it's okay, I think we'll get going. I wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Wildcat episode of Drinking with Historians from me and Varsha. And I want to especially thank our guests, Professor Anthea Butler from the University of Pennsylvania and Professor Kevin Gannon from Grandview University, who are the organizers of the Scholar Strike, which you hopefully have seen. I mean, I just took a quick look earlier at the YouTube page, thousands of views of those videos. I mean, you know, such huge activity on Twitter, on Facebook, you know, live events that I know are going on all over the country. So this thing has become kind of huge. And I know you guys have been incredibly busy all day. So taking the time to do this is really wonderful. So at the end of the day, I think, you know, everybody needs a drink, alcoholic or not. And so I got to ask you, what's everybody drinking today?
Well, should I start? Because
Please.
I'm always drinking. Well, okay, here we go. Let me do Vanna Black here. Hello, this is Tanqueray Malacca Gin. This is very difficult to find. Let me tell you a story. This gin came out in the 90s and it was really great. But then Tanqueray decided we don't want to make it anymore. And so people started looking for bottles and they went up for like $500 a bottle. Then he decided, let's bring it back. And now it's kind of gone again. So you'll notice that this has a little number down at the bottom because they only did a certain number of bottles. So this was so important today that I decided to make a gin martini. Now, let's talk about this for just 1 second and then everybody can go on. This is not a normal gin martini. Most of you, but stir it, don't shake it, okay? Stir it. You're killing everything in there because my favorite bar in Barcelona is called Dry Martini. And there's a guy named Paco there who knew how to do this and had made like thousands and thousands and thousands of martinis and taught me how to stir. So here we go. Gin martini.
I think that the greatest violence that James Bond ever did probably was telling people to shake their martinis.
Yeah, it was horrible. That's the only thing I hate about Bond movies is like it besides all the colonialism crazy crap, but you know.
Well, that too, I guess, right? But yeah. So, Kevin, how about you? What are you drinking today?
I am drinking a very rare vintage of Diet Squirt, a Midwest grapefruit soda concoction. It is tasty. It is refreshing. There is no interesting story behind it whatsoever.
Well, I mean, that there's a soda named Squirt, so I mean, I think that's kind of interesting. My wife is from Michigan, and so I've been introduced to these strange kind of, well, strange to me as a man of the East Coast, different types of sodas, Faygo, for example, and Squirt among them. So delicious, both. So
zesty.
Zesty. There you go. So, Varsha, how about you?
I am drinking Uncle Nearest. It is a Black-owned distillery, and it is an excellent whiskey. So if you are looking for like a solid whiskey, this is where you go. And there is like a legend slash real story behind the person who is like responsible for this blend. He like initially worked for, I think, Jack Daniels, and then another African American man bought another distillery, and then finally Nathan Green ended up becoming the master distiller at Uncle Nearest. So it's like, yeah, basically the true founding father of Tennessee whiskey was a Black man, not Jack Daniels. So yeah.
Interesting indeed. And so I am drinking Uncle Nearest as well, 1856. It is incredibly smooth, and I recommend everyone buying it. And if Uncle Nearest is listening, we would be happy to accept sponsorship offers at any time. All right. So that being said, now that I put in my sales pitch, so I really love. I mean, we're so excited to talk about the Scholar Strike. So I guess the first question is kind of like, how did this thing start? I mean, what was the idea behind it? Like, how did it get off the ground? Like, just tell us what's going on with this.
LeBron James. Honestly,
Is
it was
he
the
here?
night that, no, I wish you would send me some money, because we could do a lot with Scholar Strike. If you listen to LeBron, like send a check, man. You could just give us like 25 minutes worth of your pay. It'd be real good. But anyway, what happened was that it must have been 2 weeks ago, Wednesday, maybe 2 weeks ago, that the NBA went on strike. And part of this was, and I want to give the props actually to who really should be given the props, is the WNBA for their kinds of advocacy and what they've been doing. And the NBA decided, we're not playing tonight. And that was just like it. We're just not playing. And I can't remember what shooting it was. Maybe it was Jacob's shooting. Maybe it was Kenosha. It was probably Kenosha. This is terrible that I can't remember, because it's been so many, right? And that's actually a problem I want us to talk about tonight. So I thought, well, how come we can't do it? I just said, I'm a professor, I'm down to strike. And then people started saying yes, and lots of people like it. And Kevin said, well, I could help you if you want to do it. And I said, well, let's do it. And we got together that night on a Zoom, and we planned the whole thing and came up with the name Scholar Strike. That's how it happened. I mean, it really wasn't something that we all thought out a whole bunch, where I know people are sitting around going, were they planning this all summer? No, I had some other things to do. Kevin, would you like to say why, how you got dragged into this?
Yeah. I mean, that night I was driving around, I had been running some errands, and, I'm a big sports fan. So I'm following what's happening on Twitter. I'm listening to the updates about, well, they're not going to play this game. And then someone, the Milwaukee Brewers for baseball is like, well, we're not playing tonight. And I was, and one of the things, I'm kind of a labor historian by training a little bit. And so I'm thinking, like, we haven't seen a good Wildcat strike in like forever, right? So when I got home and was scrolling Twitter, instead of doing something constructive, I saw Anthea's tweet, and it was like, I've been thinking this, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if we started talking a lot more about a general strike, right? Because that's what has to happen. And, this isn't like, we're not storming the barricades or any, it's, we're not fighting the Pinkertons outside the steel mill, but, we are disrupting, and all good collective action starts with disruption. So I think, but definitely, starting in solidarity with other athletes, withholding their labor, withholding your labor is a disruption. And I think we as academics need to realize we are labor. And I know it feels kind of weird to think about and to say, and, there are some of us who have a very privileged position within it, but we are still labor. And there are things that we can do from that position that can affect change. And once we acknowledge that we are labor and have that power to withhold that labor, here we are, right? 5,000 people later, stuff all over Twitter, national coverage, it's a big deal.
So can you talk a little bit about the response? Like, I mean, you guys kind of threw this together, like you guys were mentioning earlier. I mean, like just kind of off the backs of your own labor, putting together a mailing list and websites and stuff like that. And then how has the response been, kind of with activities and videos and stuff like that?
I'd say mostly great. I mean, people have been really enthusiastic, and, I want to really send a shout out to all the people who sent videos and stuff, because that was a big backbone of all of this. And so the fact that you spent time to make a video is really important, and we're grateful for that. And the people who volunteered to help, there were, you know, there was crucial moments that we had help, you know, from people who said things that they wanted to. That they wanted to help, and some reached out, we didn't use them. But I would say overall good. And I think the interesting part about this is that it spurred people to do some other things. And I hope we can talk a little bit about later about what this means to be in community at a time like this, because I think for all of us, this was something, I just didn't expect it to take off the way it did. I really didn't. I thought that, you know, there'd be a few hundred people who want to do it and we do something little and go about our way, but it kind of turned out to be more than that. What'd you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm a little stunned by how it kind of took off and got traction. But what that does for me is it really signals that, you know, there is kind of very fertile ground for this sort of work. And, you know, again, most of the response has been great. You know, people have given their labor, their time, their expertise, their skills, and, you know, the YouTube channel, Teach It, I've been sending my students there. I've been referring people. I mean, there is amazing stuff on there. And, you know, having that be kind of the backbone of this, you know, we're withholding our labor in an institutional context, but our vocation as educators and as anti-racist educators in particular is now front facing genuinely for the people. And I think that's a really important part of the action.
Are there any naysayers? And I'm assuming there aren't just like, what do you say to all the naysayers who haven't contacted you? Because I'm assuming some did, but what do you say to those who haven't contacted you, who may just, you know, fold their arms at this and just refuse to accept that this is a valid form of action against racism?
Kevin should go first because he'll be more polite than I am.
Oh, I don't die. Let's not. You know, so there's been, you know, the unhinged right-wing response. I tweeted some stuff that came into my email inbox earlier. They found my office number, so I've got some good voicemails now too. And that's, you know, that's fine, right? Like you sort of expect, you know, when something hits CNN, like our opinion piece did, you sort of expect the rock gets kicked over a little bit. And then there's been some other folks that was like, you know, like, what is this going to do? Like the 10-year Audi are striking, and what is it? You know, it's like, you know, I think we do go again, but confirm very clearly, you can't please everybody, right? And like, you know, as someone who does a lot of leftist work and organizing, man, you know, we lefties like to fight. And, you know, so what we're doing may not have been, you know, we get the sort of I'm lefter than thou kind of stuff, and you should have done this, or be more militant here, or you're tenured, so what the fuck can you do, and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I get that, but it's like we're doing stuff, we're doing work. And it got a platform and it's got traction under it, and a lot of things are coming out of it that wouldn't have been there before. So, you know, if you don't like it, cool. But I think it was important to do the work, and I think the results are important.
Yeah. In the words of another famous historian, Beyonce, I twirl on my haters. Okay. That's how I feel about this. I'm twirling on my haters on the right and the left. I mean, I just don't care, because you know what? At the end of the day, I'm a Black woman, and I could get shot at the bus stop. I could get stopped in a car. I could have things happen to me. I care about other Black people, and Black lives matter to me. And so basically, like all this, well, you should have done this and you could have done that, and you spelled Kaepernick wrong. Yes, I'm still mad about that. Thank you. My birthday is this month. I'm still heated. Or the person who was mad at me today on Twitter because I blocked them. I blocked you because you remember that email you sent. I mean, it's all kinds of little stuff. And you know, this is where I feel like I'm not a real academic, because academics sometimes bicker about the stupidest shit. I'm sorry, I'm gonna cuss. And I'm like, we don't have time for stupid shit right now. This country is burning up. And we have police killing people, like shooting people 7 times in the back. We got police beating people with clubs in Portland. You know, we got a president that keeps saying, you know, I'm going to be here for the next 17 years or whatever it's going to be. And I don't understand why people aren't out marching in the street more. I mean, I know I'm not there because I got a bad knee. And if I didn't have a bad knee, I'd be out there every day, probably getting beat up. But it's also, the other thing about this is that for the people who are complaining, what will you do when things go bad? What will you do when they come for you? And that's where we are right now. What will they do when they come for you? So if you don't stand up for this right now, for social justice, for racial justice, you won't stand up for your colleagues who could be stopped in a car, or their kids who could be shot and killed just because they're walking on the street. then what is your problem? Why are you even bothering? You know, I used to joke all the time and say I wanted to be a white guy in a tweed jacket walking around a campus not doing shit, because, you know, nobody's going to ask them to do anything. And I know I drive my colleagues and my institution crazy because I act like an activist instead of an academic. But my academic work makes me an activist. I study African American religious history. I write about religious right. Everything I do makes me an activist. And I didn't plan it this way, but here we are.
I think,
Feel the same way. I mean, I don't directly work on race. I work on US foreign policy, but somehow everything that I do, which is about dams and water, goes back to the history of oppression and racism in this country. And you have to grapple with that and be willing to grapple with that as an academic without fear of being called like leftist or whatever, or a radical. You have to be willing to tell the truth. And I think that's what the scholar strike is about. You guys are speaking truth to power about this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you study U.S. history, you study race,
Exactly.
whether you admit it or not, you know, and that's the knot that I think, you know, some of us haven't untied yet. And, you know, on Anthea's point, it's like, you know, I think I mean, you could say, well, why aren't you in the streets? Why aren't you, you know, storming the Bastille? You know, how is 2 days of not teaching and doing your work, you know, but again, disruption is where it starts. And so you disrupt. And I would also caution us about framing this as like, you know, an artificial binary, right? Like you could do a thing like scholar strike, and that doesn't mean that you can't do anything else. Like this is not your only chance to participate in collective action. Yeah. And if this is the only collective action that comes out there, I mean, I'm happy with what we've done. I've been proud to be a part of it and to help Anthea. But if this is it, man, then, you know, we fucked up. There's got to be more. So acting like this is our only shot, that doesn't seem very productive to me.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to something that Anthea that you mentioned for a minute, is this binary that I've heard so many times, and I'm sure you've heard many more times than I, between being an activist and a scholar, as if they are oppositional in some way, that you can't do real scholarship, because I mean we've seen this leveraged against even within the academy, and especially within the academy, right, by against colleagues of color. That they're not doing kind of real scholarship, or they're lacking rigor because they're actually thinking about the real world implications of the work that we do. And I think one of the things that I really like about Scholar Strike is it's saying, like, you know, fuck that. You know, we are people who live in the world, and also, you know, going to Kevin's point about like studying American history is studying the history of race. Studying fucking medieval history is studying the history of race as well. Like, I mean, these are not things that you can kind of escape. And so 2 days of disruption of the work of the university can have a powerful, hopefully carry on effect, like you were saying, right? It's not just, you know, for further actions within or amongst kind of scholars or people like that, but also like the students. Like we're modeling kind of a type of engaged behavior, and they might not agree with us politically, whatever, but they can see that we're actors in the world as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this tension between what universities and colleges are asking for right now. They want people to be public engagement, public scholarship, right? Yep. And so they say all this stuff, but they want you to do it in the way that they want you to do it, which is basically like show up on CNN, show up on the History Channel, do a couple of little nice things, and then walk off and don't do anything that's going to make us upset. Now, I have to give my University of Pennsylvania props. You know, I've probably, you know, caused them a lot of, you know, almost heart attacks about things, but you know, on the other hand, people have mostly left me alone and let me do what I needed to do. Mm-hmm. But I have had people say, you know, you need to get this done, or you need to get this book done, or you need to get that done, you know, and then I've written over 300 op-eds. So I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm writing. I just don't know what they want. I mean, but I do know what they want. They want it to be normal. But I think this is actually an interesting moment, and we need to run with it, because this moment of the pandemic means that you can't do the normal research that you would have done, because you can't get to the library, you can't get those ILL books, you can't go travel to Turkey or wherever you're going to go look at something, you can't go to an archive for us historians, you can't do the things that you would normally do. It means that you have to be creative about what you do, and there's all these other things that are happening in the world around us. So why can't we think about a way to do our work, but to also be front facing to the public? Because I think the public has a hunger to know some things. And it's not that we're like so smart that we're smarter than everybody else. It's just that we can share some knowledge. And that's what I really wanted to do with Scholar Strike, is share this knowledge about race and racism and policing and all of this, and let people, make their minds up instead of hearing a soundbite every night.
And I think we miss the fact too in these conversations, teaching is public scholarship. And until we start talking about it that way in our institutional settings, I mean, what are we doing, right? And that's not, teaching, if that's the avocation that we have, it's not just in the formal classroom setting with the students who are enrolled in our class. Like, scholarship is teaching. Otherwise, it's pointless, right? And so this moment, I think, highlights the need for that kind of scholarship as teaching, teaching as scholarship kind of combination there, because it's, and especially in history, right? Like, I think we get this wrong a lot. And Matt, your point about the, the objectivity hammer being brought out, like you can't be a scholar and an activist, yeah. I mean, it reminds me, it's like the identity politics trope, right? Like, white dudes telling everyone else to stop practicing identity politics is actually the strongest form of identity politics there is. Yeah. And until we get off this idea that there is objectivity, right? There is no objectivity, right? Like, you can't do that. We do not exist in a vacuum. And until we reckon with that as historians, and that doesn't mean you can't try for it. That doesn't mean there aren't standards of, archival practice and use of evidence and things like that. But, we're not some card, we tell our students that history always changes because we always think about the past in different ways and find new evidence. Maybe we should model that, like, as professionals. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to realize that even if you don't want your scholarship to be activism in the sense that we might think of that first, your scholarship is activism. Your teaching is activism. Yeah. Students are always learning. We are always teaching, whether we intend it or not. So what are students learning from us? What are people learning from us, right? We need to pay more attention to that.
Yeah. I want to go back to the point that you made about how teaching is public scholarship and is public engagement, because I'm teaching the Early American Survey as a TA right now. And I always ask this question to my students: why are you taking this class? And usually I get the same answer from all 20 students and all 40 students. It's just, it's a general ed requirement. I got to take it. But this semester, I would say nearly 80% of them told me, oh, I'm taking this obviously because it's a requirement, but also because I think it might be important for me to understand US history in this political moment. And none of them could define what they meant by this political moment, even the American students, regardless of the international students. So it was fascinating for me to see that they could understand that history could teach them something, but they couldn't pinpoint that exactly. So I'm keeping track of the Q&A, and I don't want to jump to Q&A early, but a lot of people are asking what grad students can do. So I guess my question as a grad student is, if I were to talk to my students, in a couple of days, because my class is on Thursday, what should I tell them generally about the state of scholars and anti-racist scholarship, basically? Like, what should they look for? What should they be focused on? What can undergrads do? Not just grad students. Like, what can they be into?
Yeah, I think, I'm teaching, I'll talk about my class that I'm teaching that I didn't teach today, by the way, Religion from Civil Rights to Black Lives Matter. And I asked all my students, so why are you here? We want to know about this. A lot of my students, they have about 3 or 4 students who were involved in protests this summer and had seen a lot of police brutality. And I'm like, you're going to see some of the same stuff. You're going to see the hoses and the dogs in this class, okay? You're going to see it all. You're going to see Bull Connor and all the rest of them. So I think the first thing I would say to them is that you have to be assiduous at asking your professors, if you're in a class that this applies to, why are we reading all white authors? Why are we reading, why are we reading women? Why are we reading Black women or Latino women or Asian women? Why are we only reading these white guys? That's the first thing I would ask. The second thing I would say is that, how can you be an advocate where you are? And of course, we're in this pandemic time, so that's really hard for you to be in kind of groups that you would normally be in on campus. But I think you need to start asking some questions about, what can I be reading? How can I pay attention? I think, to your point about why people were taking your class, nobody knows what civics is anymore. There's not a sense of civic life here. People don't even understand what democracy is. And so this is how a nation falls, when we don't understand what it is you built on in the first place. Now, granted, there was slavery and everything else there, but there were some ideas that were worth having. I can walk 2 miles right now to Independence Hall. And although I believe those guys would have just taken out my teeth and put them in George Washington's mouth, they were trying to think about some things so they could get away from the British, right? So I think there's that. For the grad students, I would encourage you to start thinking about how you're going to incorporate this in your scholarship, because I got a hint for you. This is all people are going to be looking for the next 5 years, okay? And I already see it in the job ads, and you need to come correct or don't come at all. Don't try to pretend like you know Audre Lorde and everybody else and you don't know crap. Start reading, okay? Because if this hasn't been a part of what you're doing, then you need to be asking your advisor and everything else, if you're in the humanities at least, why isn't that there? But I would say that about, you know, communications, anything. I mean, think about what it is you can be doing to broaden your scope, okay? Because it's all about race, whether you do white guys or not, it's all about race, right? And so you need to think about how that is. And one last thing really quick, what I have been really interested in the kind of responses we get, and I'd be interested to hear what Kevin has to say, is that the people who have been clamoring for materials. It is clear to me that a lot of people don't even know where to start reading and where to start looking. And so I have some thoughts about where this might go in the future, but I'll leave that for a little while later because I don't want Kevin to fall out and die over there and the dogs have to drag him out. But I think there's a space here to do something. And I'm just shocked really by the amount of people who don't know stuff. Yeah, I really am.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. You know, I'll add one thing from my context at a teaching oriented institution. You know, we're in Iowa, not noted for its racial diversity, yet sneaky diverse in some places. And my institution right now is doing some meaningful work, and I mean that seriously, on, you know, what I would call anti-racist inclusive pedagogy, and understanding that, you know, and we have been an institution that has diversified rapidly. You know, when I started in 2004, our students were about 93% white. Our student body now is less than 70% white, right? So that's a big transformation, and we have not handled that well in many ways. And so it's like, so we have to think about how are we serving our students, all of our students, in an equitable, inclusive way. And, you know, there's got to be theory behind that practice. And so if you're a historian and you're looking at going out into any sort of teaching position, whether it's a public facing one, whether it's in a small teaching institution, and I know the job market is a smoldering crater right now, but if you're in this pipeline, one way, in fact, I would say the way to think about what your future prospects might look like is, this is the world we are in now. Schools like mine are going to ask you, can you teach all our students well? Do you have skills? Do you have knowledge? And what theoretical kind of stance are you coming from with your pedagogy? So if you haven't had the chance to think about that in your grad program, start and push your advisors and faculty to, because if they have not been pushing you to think about these things, then they're failing you too.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more tip as a grad student. Sorry, Matt, is that like,
No.
You shouldn't do this just for your CV. You should be doing this for your own scholarship as well, and for your own, you know, soul. Because if you are not willing to be the best teacher you can be as a grad student, you should not expect to be a good teacher as a professor. And I think that is also at the core of this scholar strike, is not just protesting the racism and institutional racism in universities and in the government in this country right now, but it's specifically protesting any attempt to continue the cycle of exclusion in academia and ridicule in academia of other types of scholarship, other types of pedagogy. So you guys make really good points, and I want to add on to that and emphasize that grad students as well as professors should be doing this not just for, you know, for image's sake, but for the fact that this is how you're going to become a better scholar and also a better human being.
Yeah. If I could add on to that too, is I think that not only does the action need to be bottom up, but in many cases it needs to be top down as well. And I say that as a senior white tenured male professor who's also a department chair, right? So, you know, it's on me and people like me, and I have to give a shout out to like my dean and other department chairs at Virginia Tech who have created spaces in which students feel comfortable asking these questions and also organizing events like this, right? So that, you know, there can be opportunities for people to have these important conversations and to think about pedagogy and to think about kind of their activities as a scholar, but also as a citizen, you know, within the context of the university. So, and sometimes that's means people like me saying like, hey, we should be having these conversations, because that allows them the space without kind of jeopardizing themselves by speaking up from marginalized positions. So,
And what's your institution's mission statement? Everybody doing work for the institution. What is your institution's mission statement? Because this is the work that fits right into what your institution has promised all of its constituents its mission is. And so this is mission-driven work. And for me, that's been a way to get a lot of leverage and a platform for this kind of conversation and work at my institution is, tie it to your institution's mission, which are noble sounding things. So maybe we should put them into practice once in a while.
Yeah, exactly.
They are always asking us to redo strategic plans and stuff like that, and to use the language of the university, as we're crafting them. Like, all right, man, you asked for it. Let's do this, right? Yep. So we can do this. I wanted to go back to something before we get to Q&A, and we have some really great questions I want to make sure that we get to from the audience here. So one of the things you said, going back to the very beginning is, if it stops here, then this is kind of a problem. So what do you envision? I mean, like in your heart of hearts, like what do you see as kind of the next thing?
Okay, here we go. So I see a couple of things. One is I really like what we did with the videos, and I think we need a clearinghouse to put up things about race and racism, policing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think this could be a really good thing. I mean, talks just go into the ether. You put them up on your university website, nobody sees them. So I'm thinking about creating a platform that, this is a little bit bigger than this. We can put them on YouTube. This is free. We put this up and people can watch this stuff and see it. So that's number one. Number two, I'm thinking about advocacy. How can we help people who are protesting? How can we help Black Lives Matter and other groups that have been doing this work? We have a lot of groups here in Philadelphia that are doing, justice work. And we're going to have people, I'm thinking about what is to come in the next few months. We're going to have people out on the streets because of, evictions. We're going to have all kinds of stuff. And there are people in the academy who do work on this kind of stuff, do work on real estate, who do work on economics, who do work on all of these things. You need to be sharing. And that's what I think we need to be getting that information out and trying to help people. The third thing I think is to think about teaching materials, whether that's syllabi, all of that kind of stuff that would help us to, we can trade off things and say, I know you're doing this class and you don't know a lot about, racism in the 19th century, or whatever. I'm thinking about Kevin and I, because we both work in the 19th century. How do we talk about that, right? What are some good links? What are some good images? What are things that you can be using? So I'm thinking about building out a platform like that. And then finally, this is the most dangerous thing I'm going to say tonight. I'm thinking about the next 2 months in the election. And I would like to see us do some get out the vote stuff. I would like to see us talk about some of the issues involved right now. I mean, this law and order thing is a long history of crap, right? Kevin's eyes are getting big, and we both know what that means. And I think we need to talk about that. We need to talk about a lot of different things. And I think there's sense in which people aren't willing to say the kinds of things that need to be said because we only have 260 characters or whatever it is on Twitter, right? And you're always afraid of what somebody's going to say, but there's some things that need to be said, that there's some hard things because, honestly, we're about to lose this democracy. Whatever you think about it, it is going into the distance, and it's about to be fascism and some kind of crazy crap. And, if you don't hear what if you're not listening to what you're hearing right now and seeing with the post office, with the kinds of things that the police are doing, how the police are, right here with the feds right now. Somebody said, why didn't you put out a list of people who've been in this? I'm like, Consul Pro, do you not understand? The feds are looking, I know they watching me. I know there's some file about me. I don't care. This is the price of what happens, right? So I think that we need to be really, at least for me in the future, I want to see us being educators, but I also want us to be a clearinghouse for things. It's not that we can facilitate everything, but we can be a clearinghouse.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring something up. I don't want this to be about Kevin's book, but I have ordered it and I am excited to read it. But I just wanted to, one thing, Kevin, that you've talked about in your book, and I haven't read it yet, is about this idea of putting scholars and specifically teachers back in the center of all of the issues that are going on at secondary education at that level, right? And so one issue that's big that I think one of the summaries mentions is the free speech crisis. And so I was just wondering how you would tackle the issue of talking about an anti-racist syllabus, an anti-racist curriculum, a decolonized curriculum in the midst of this so-called free speech crisis that we are in, like, how do you tackle that as a university professor? How do you recommend grad students or even high school teachers tackle that?
Oh man, I could go all night on this. So I do have a chapter in my book where I yell about this a lot because, I mean, we all know what free speech and the idea of civility, those are weaponized against certain people and certain arguments. One of the things that I think is most successful is, again, tying it to your institutional mission or your department's objectives. You know, every university and institution gives a big shit about assessment. So assessment depends on learning outcomes. What are the learning outcomes you have articulated in, let's say, your history major or for your 100 or 1,000 level history courses? And I can guarantee you can fit anti-racist and decolonial pedagogies in there. And that's the thing, right? Like, you may not like it, but this is mission-driven work. And it is what it is, right? So if you want to stand in the way of honest assessment and mission-driven things, go right ahead. Now, of course, it's easy for me to say because, as Matt pointed, you know, I'm a tenured white guy, former department chair. So the other thing is that people who are in positions like Matt and mine, you know, we need to be helping the folks doing this work, and we need to be not just behind them, like, hey, you know, let us know if you need anything. We need to be actively supporting and cultivating space for our junior colleagues, for our grad students to be doing this. And again, if we, you know, institutions say these are the things we are committed to. And so when you talk about, you know, in terms of this sort of free speech crisis, if you're getting pushbacks, it's like, okay, what are you really committed to here? Because I see a lot of bending over backwards to, you know, create space for controversial ideas from the right, and yet nothing here. Your students are listening. Let's talk about persistence and retention numbers, right? How's that going to work for you? So those are two words also that get the attention of administrators pretty quick.
One of the questions, I mean, if we could jump to Q&A a little bit, I know we've been kind of dipping in and out, is a couple of people have asked about K-12 education within all this. And so how do you envision, I mean, one of the things that I think we have talked about on our show, on our this webcast several times, is kind of this artificial distinction, right, between kind of higher education and K-12 education, and the need to try to break that down. Like, is this a moment, do you see this as a moment in which that can, those barriers can further be broken down?
Yeah, I really do. You know, I got to shout out my mama here because she was an 8th grade history teacher, so I get it rightly. Yeah, I think this is a really important moment because here in Philadelphia, I want to talk about Philly for a minute. We got shootings going on, we got all kinds of stuff, and we got these kids who have, you know, computers and stuff, and they're having to be at home alone. And somebody needs to be able to talk to them about real stuff, right? And this is real things that they understand. They understand about policing. They know some stuff better than we do, to be honest, because they've got the police in their neighborhoods in Northwest Philadelphia all the time. They know how they have to deal. They know what this means. They know what it's like to deal with gun violence. They know what it's like to deal with economic issues, and, you know, mom and dad having to go to work in a time during the pandemic, you know, when it's really tough and people dying of COVID. So I think that one of the things that we can do as university professors and college professors is to think about ways in which we can reach out to people and help this stuff. And I'm trying to think about ways that maybe we can broaden out what we're doing here with Scholar Strike and include, you know, elementary school and middle school and high school teachers, because they're going through a lot right now. Some of them, like in my home state of Texas, are being asked to go back to work, and they got like 2 masks to last them the whole damn year. And that's ridiculous. I mean, if there's anybody that needs to be advocated for, it's for our school teachers right now who are trying to do their work in the midst of a pandemic, and they don't have what they need to do. And they have stupid governors like, you know, oh, I don't even want to start naming names, but, you know, yeah, your governor too, who are telling people to go back to school, and they're like basically putting up saran wrap between the desks. And I think that these people need to be fought for because they are the backbone of this country. And part of where we are right now and how bad it is about the educational system, K through 12. I mean, Betty DeVos has destroyed this. And if you want to bring me back to talk about Betty DeVos and her whole damn family and those Calvinists, I'm happy to come back because I'm ready to just rip them a new one because they're horrible. And I don't, you know, I'm sorry if it's Dutch Reform people on here. Let me tell you something. Y'all were responsible for apartheid. That's why Betty DeVos is the way that she is.
Another dimension to this is like the system of, specifically for history education, I know, is like the fact that textbooks are like mainly made by certain companies in certain states. Yes. Cough, cough, Texas. right? And I'm currently helping out a couple of kids who go to an elementary school here in the area, Malcolm X Elementary. And today they're learning about Cesar Chavez. And I am amazed at the work this teacher is able to do over Zoom. But I am sure that she is not getting the support that she needs to be getting from even the state of California, right? So I think you two are exactly right that there should no longer be a divide between secondary and higher education, especially because the job of the educator is what's at stake here. And that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the ability for us to do our job equitably and to treat all of our students the same and to give them all the best possible chance at success. And that does not begin or end with high school. You guys are exactly right. This sounds like an amazing plan.
And I'll give you a couple strategies that people can think about doing right now, for example. So if you're in a history department, reach out to your local school district and offer professional development opportunities. So I do a bunch of professional development here for Des Moines Public Schools, and I've had the honor to do that for like the last 3 or 4 years pretty intensely. And teachers tell me all the time, they're like, man, we just don't get good PD all the time. You know, and it's not like it's awful and well, sometimes it is, but it's like they just don't have the resources sometimes to be able to bring in, you know, professional scholars, for example. So how can you step in to fill that gap, right? Because then again, you know, we talk about this as front-facing stuff and open educational resources, OERs. This is the future for textbook publishing. It's not going to be print anymore. It's going to be online digital projects, and good OERs that are peer-reviewed and scholarly sound are going to be what's making their way into K-12 curriculums, especially if, you know, we continue with these sort of neoliberal austerity budgets. So who's writing those? Because there's a well-funded army of internet writers on the right who are waiting to give you, you know, Ayn Rand's history of the United States. So if, you know, OER, open educational resources, digital scholarship, curricular-facing materials, this is where it's at. And if this is where the work is going to be done. This is going to be one of the main contested fields here, and we need to be on that.
And I know from a public university, so UC Berkeley has major issues with having a diverse student class here, right? And so I think that's one level of it, making sure we as grad students and professors advocate for the diversity of the student class. But at the same level, California has decreased its funding for its public universities, and that is going countrywide, right? I am sure the same thing is happening in Virginia and in Iowa and in Pennsylvania. And I think that's another level that, you know, eventually scholars have to step their toes into, accepting the fact that we deserve more funding as public universities.
And this is where students and their families are our allies here. You know, so often we talk about students as adversaries, but the more education that students and families have about like how this funding works, like professors ain't making 6 figures a year, right? That money's going somewhere else. And here's your funding per student. And here's why tuition costs the way it does. And we could do free tuition if other things happened, like we had an eviscerated funding 87% since Reagan got elected. Like when those things get out there, all of a sudden you have powerful advocates in your corner. So then it's not just the pointy head academics arguing for more money, it becomes a much broader coalition. And that has to happen on the municipal and state levels to get traction.
Yeah, it's always stunning. Like every once in a while, I spend some time on my university's subreddit, which I encourage people to do, but maybe only briefly because you learn some things. But every once in a while, right? I mean, a chart is shared there about state funding, right, and the percentage of state funding as a portion of the university's budget, and it's just off a cliff, man. Mm-hmm. And it's just people are shocked, right? They see public university next to a place like Virginia Tech, and they say like, oh. University's paying what, 60, 70, 80% of the university's budgets?
Yep.
No.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up something that like seems like a very online issue, but I think it's a real issue. There have been a couple of senators, and I think now even the president have brought up this idea of investigating schools that teach the 1619 project. So I'm not sure if you guys have dealt with it on your own, the 1619 project, but like, how do you deal with the threat, at least from a historian's perspective, of this idea that you will be blocked from teaching about slavery? Or
I think Anthea is going to explode. I think Anthea is about to explode right now.
Anthea's question. I'm the kid in the back of the room going, Professor Butler, Professor Butler, Professor Butler. You know what? Let me tell you what's going on here. White men are scared that we're going to tell the truth about their history. They're scared that we're going to tell the truth about the raping, the beating, the lynching, the, you know, the selling off of families, that it's not this glorified American exceptionalism anymore. And so the 1619 Project, you know, there were, you know, Nicole Hannah-Jones, it identified, yes, I didn't do X, X, and X, but you know what? That project is fantastic because what it did was give people who were sitting at home a way to look at that magazine and say, oh, I didn't know that. Because why? Because those textbooks that got approved in Texas were lying about slavery and saying, oh, but everybody was happy. It was like going with the wind. That's bullshit, okay? And we need to start really teaching. Every time I teach Intro to Africana Studies, everybody is melting down. My Black students melt down because they're upset because they're like, nobody told us it was this bad. The white students are upset because they're like, I think the Black students in the class are looking at me like this and my parents didn't do this. I'm like, oh yeah, well, you're probably related to me, okay? Since I have like, you know, what did the DNA say? Like 15% British and, you know, 1% Iberian Peninsula, whatever. I'm like, I got all of y'all in me, okay? So basically, here's the thing. I think that the 1619 Project just grows because basically Trump is giving it oxygen and he's trying every racist damn thing he can do to win this election. I'm like, dude, you're trying to out Bull Connor and George Wallace at the same time, and it ain't working for you because guess what? You know, Michael Cohen's going to be on at 9 o'clock at Mad Hour where I'm going to be having another one of these because I got Michael Cohen's book sitting up here and I could probably read it tonight in bed. And, you know, he's going to tell me everything that happened, including those naked pictures that Jerry Falwell, you know, had to, you know, basically say he was going to like you for so you could get elected in 2016. So, you know, I think that this kind of thing from conservatives is the way that they want to hold on to what they've crafted. And this is where I get to do my plug for my next book, March 2021, UNC Press, which is, it'll be a division of UNC Press, which is F&F, which will be called White Evangelical Racism, The Politics of Morality in America, which will show you a history from the 19th to the 21st century about how evangelicals married themselves to racism and the Republican Party, and this is why we are where we are today. So yeah, this is all a shill, and I'm really tired of it, but we need to tell the history of this country the right way, the way that it happened. And yeah, there were some really horrible things that happened, but it's still America, and we can be proud of that, but right now we can't be proud of it when we got people trashing it.
Yeah. I think that's the most difficult thing for students in like a freshman class or like an undergraduate class to understand is how can I both be a good citizen, a happy citizen, a proud and active citizen, and at the same time live in a country and acknowledge this country's horrible history. And the best part about teaching is that I teach them how to do that because I simultaneously show them the cognitive dissonance of people like Thomas Jefferson, the cognitive dissonance of people like Abraham Lincoln. And when you're able to show them that none of this was preordained, we weren't born racist, we chose this path, and we can choose to not be racist, we can choose to be anti-racist in our teaching and our future, that's how they get excited about history. And I think it's true for all the humanities. But I do want to ask one question because somebody asked this. What can university faculty, I know you guys are both in the social sciences and humanities, but what can university faculty in the sciences do to attempt to highlight issues of systemic racism and like lack of racial equity, either at the undergraduate level or at the graduate level, or just in their pedagogy? Like, what should they be doing?
Oh, I could go all night on this too. So, you know, what STEM faculty need to be doing is share the leaky STEM pipeline with your students. Why is it that so many students of color, you know, we go from high school all the way to through the end of a PhD program and you go from a flood to a trickle, you know, because STEM is everywhere in secondary ed now. So why isn't that, you know, why aren't those numbers carrying forth? There are some answers to that, right? In your own pedagogical choices, in your own curricular choices. Who are your students reading? Who are they seeing in the textbooks? Who are they seeing in the video that you use? If we tell our students, like if I'm a STEM instructor and I say, you are going to be a knowledge creator in this field, like that is the goal of this education for you, right? You are going to, you know, pursue science, you know, create original knowledge in this field. Well, who are the knowledge creators that our students are seeing? Because if they don't see knowledge creators that look like them, that, you know, what we're telling them doesn't have an evidentiary basis behind it, and it rings hollow, and it causes some cognitive dissonance. So even the routine quotidian decisions we make about what names go into a case study, you know, even that stuff matters, because this is the accumulation of it, right? And teach the history of your disciplines. You don't have to take all semester doing it, but in Bio 101, there should be, you know, a few classes given over to the history of your field as it is developed in the United States, because y'all made scientific racism a thing, right? In physics, in, you know, in chemistry, right? And it doesn't have to be a feel-good, check the boxes, every identity did something cool scientifically. But you know what? If we're going to talk about physics, for example, we need to talk about what happened in the Muslim world to pave the way for Isaac Newton to do his stuff. Right? We need to talk about where algebra comes from. And we need to talk about why that matters for us today. So there's a ton that people in STEM can be doing, but I would argue that a lot of it has to come from looking at it through both a pedagogical and historical lens.
And that's not disconnected from the field of study, right? I think, and that's a
Absolutely
conversation that I mean, not as a non-specialist, but I've seen play out online in many cases as well. Is that I think there are many places that are, or many people that are trying to advocate for that. Is that science is a culturally constructed discipline, right? It's not. Yeah. You know, again, back to that objectivity canard. So sorry.
Exactly. And STEM Twitter, you know, is a great example. There are communities on STEM Twitter that are doing enormously cool anti-racist work, right? And it's through some of these exact same things. History is one thing where we're really good at examining the roots of our own discipline, right? Like historiography is so much of what we do, and that we forget sometimes that other disciplines don't have that sense of kind of disciplinary introspection and awareness of their origins. Like if economists did a little more introspection, you know. So this is a challenge, I think, for anyone teaching on the college level is, you know, where are your fields of knowledge come from? How are they constructed? What are their origins, right? Like when we talk about the origins of genetics, for example, you know, because then we can't say that these things just happened in a vacuum. You know, these were culturally constructed questions and answers that scientific practitioners were trying to frame. And that cultural construction matters for so much. And then we, you know, the general public looks at science as, you know, the way, the light, and the truth. We shall not question these things. And that can be, as we've seen, really problematic. So yeah, STEM folks and on the college level, get after it. Think historically, and let your students think historically too.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions on critical race theory, right? It's in the same vein as the 1619 project, but basically, as we know, the right, as well as people who don't really understand what critical race theory is, have latched onto it as a term that is negative and stuff like that. Do you two have other advice besides going back to the primary sources when it comes to not just defending the idea of critical race theory, but specifically defending the idea of anti-racist pedagogy? Like, if somebody is pushing back at your university, besides going back to the primary sources to convince them that you are correct on teaching in this way, are there other methods that you like to use when you're attempting to convince them?
Well,
he was bothering me. Sorry.
I don't. Oh, look at the kitty. You know, I think that one of the things right now that we need to disabuse ourselves of this notion is this: that how much time are we going to spend on these people, really? Because see, you end up spending a whole bunch of time on these folks, and you never get shit done. Because basically, what it is, it's a you know, what do they call it, a rope-a-dope. You know, they get you in the rope-a-dope, and you don't do anything. And so I'm not interested in getting in a rope-a-dope with people. I'm interested in people who want to learn something. If you're not willing to learn something, then I'm not going to talk to you. If you're convinced, I mean, I think we really have what we need to understand right now as academics is we're in a time where you got QAnon and all these people who believe certain kinds of things, and they're not coming off of it. And there's you don't have time to waste. You need to talk to people who who want to learn, who want to know more about things. And so the critical race theory thing, we need a whole nother hour to talk about, because, you know, basically that's the Southern Baptist bullshit. Okay. They're the ones that came against that. And I will say it's Southern Baptist bullshit right out here. And I'm from Texas because I know what kind of stuff they do. And this is the thing that they latch onto something, they don't understand it, and they want to use it as a way to say, but they're trying to change our values. They're trying to change the way we think about things. And it's all if you don't understand the conservative rope-a-dope, You're gonna get caught up in it, okay?
Yeah.
So don't get caught up in it, like Muhammad Ali says. Don't get caught up in the rope-a-dope. I mean, you're gonna end up you end up on the ground, and they end up being victorious and making a ton of money on Fox.
Yeah.
I think,
It's the new cultural Marxism,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's the new cultural, and if people are, just ask them which Derek Bell article they thought was the one that offended them the most. And if they don't know who Derek Bell is, it's just like, all right,
something, I mean, to Anthea and Kevin, your point is something we were talking about earlier. I mean, I can't remember if it was during or slightly before, is like the devil has enough advocates, right? So, I mean, these are things that don't need to be argued for. I mean, critical race theory has a valid academic pedigree. I mean, it offers us a better way to understand the world. And so, this is important stuff, right? So we don't need to, spend our time arguing with people who are arguing in bad faith.
Yeah, and to Anthea's point too, not only does it take up all the oxygen, but like, let's say this is happening in a higher educational context. What are our students seeing about this? Like, who gets to have all the effort taken to make them feel better about something? Right? Like, we're doing all this labor to bend over backwards for a few cranky white young Republicans. What are our students of color getting? Where's the energy and the time devoted to their needs, to their, to the agenda that these, student organizations are bringing forward? Those are just dismissed out of hand because we're too busy not pissing off the white administration. So, what are we telling our students when who are we giving our resources to? We know nobody has enough time. We know nobody has enough money. So where are we spending all those things? Because that says something.
Let me add one thing to this that's really important. For those of you who are on Twitter, go look at the top of my Twitter feed and see what I'm talking about with Turning Point and campus reform. This is really important because you have interlopers in your classroom who are not there to listen to you. They're here to turn you in and to become the next Charlie Kirk, okay? And so we need to understand that the classroom isn't what it used to be. And I did that thread because so many people are going to have Zooms now, and they're going to record you. They're going to record all the things you're going to say. And then you're going to end up being a headline in these places. And I've already had 7 years of crap from these people on me. And so I know what they do, and I know how this works. And they're very, very, very well funded. And they have minions everywhere, I promise you. So, those people who call Kevin's office today are probably part of that. I'm sure your student, whatever Republican student organization saw this and thought, oh, he's doing this, let's get this liberal. So I just want to say to you that in this particular environment that we're in online and having to do a lot of things online, be very careful about what you say. So I've already burned every bridge I could possibly burn, so it doesn't matter to me. But for some of you who don't have tenure or trying to get a tenure track job, you might want to think about that.
Yeah, because so,
just block on Twitter, because if you don't block, if you just mute these people, they can still see everybody in your threads, all your followers, and this is how they do targeted harassment. So block, get out of this, the discourse speech. It's fucking Twitter. It's my living room, right? If you don't come in my living room and pee on the carpet, right? So I'm blocking you. That's the way it works in those spaces.
Yeah. So this is why Kevin and I get along, because we understand each other. Like, there's no talking to you. There's no trying to have a civil conversation. Hit that block.
So what's the action items for people who are scholars at all different levels? Is it to go to scholarstrike.com and fill out the information there and learn whatever you can from there?
Well, if you fill out scholarstrike.com right now, you're going to get our away message, because basically we don't have time to be like, sending you shit this late in the day. But here's what we want you to do. We want you to write to us at scholarstrike@gmail.com and tell us what you think should happen next. Tell us how you want to be involved. Tell us what you think should happen next. And we will think about that and, process some stuff. And we have a good email list of people now who care about, race and America and all of these things that we're dealing with right now, and policing. And we want to be able to get that out. We want to hear about what's happening on your campuses. We want to know the issues that you're dealing with, because a lot of you are dealing with policing just like we are at Penn. And, I think we need to be together in a time when we can't be together physically at conferences and sitting at bars and doing stuff. this is what we have. And so we need to be able to use it in the way that we can.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point. And sorry, Kevin, just very briefly, I think that one of the wonderful things that I think is coming out of Scholar Strike is as Anthea was just saying, is solidarity. Right, is I think that there's a tendency within the academy is to snipe across all sorts of hierarchies and to not think of ourselves, Kevin, as you pointed out earlier, as all of us as labor, right, and like a particular kind of labor, and that we can think about these things together because we have a particular set of expertise in these areas, and we're well positioned to impact people because of, if nothing else, this is the vast number of people that we interact with in our classrooms all the time. So, right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin, get the last word, Kevin, please.
Oh, just real quick on Anthea's point, we have a YouTube channel, we have a website, we have sites of digital community, and there's nothing to say that this stuff has to go away, and as we were talking about earlier, the idea about, sharing curriculum and communities of practice, it's, in these times in particular, we need that stuff to sustain ourselves, but also to do this work and to do it well. And so, if we've got a little bit of an infrastructure already built up for that, then let's take advantage of it.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't want to lose it, and I want to try to use it as much as we can. And I'm going to warn you all now that there might be another little piece. There was a piece that we didn't put into this that I wanted to think about people who are especially, tenured or full, who, if you wanted to donate your salary that you left for the day or two, and we can give that to, I know somebody who'll be able to dole that out to some different organizations for Black Lives Matter and things like that. I think that would be a really important thing to do. I'm not asking everybody to do that, but I think that's a way to show solidarity too. Sometimes you can't do everything, but maybe if you give a little bit of a contribution, that could help out too. We need to help organizers on the ground right now because people need bail money. People need money to deal with their, medical assistance. People need to do money for organizing. This is going to be a long haul, folks, and we need to look at it as being a long haul as opposed to a short haul.
Yeah. And I think.
And if.
No, go ahead, Conversion.
Oh, I just want to say, if any of you end up being naysayers after watching this, I would encourage you to think, in the words of Pete Seeger, which side are you on? Are you going to be a thug for JH Blair, or are you going to be a union man? Okay, so think about how you can actually be an advocate, how you can show your solidarity, and listen to Dr. Butler and Dr. Gannon when they talk about how this is a whole process. It's not just 2 days. I think that's the coolest thing that I've learned today. Matthew,
and can I just say one thing to the person who said, oh, this is only going to be for 2 days? You really don't know me now, do you?
Yeah, I could say after working with Anthea for the past couple of weeks on this, that was a big swing and a miss.
Yeah, no, man. I'm just I'm like a bulldog. If I bite you, that's it. That's the end. or maybe like a Rottweiler. I'm clamping down and I'm not letting go.
Yeah.
I can think of no better way to close things up, because we are past our hour right now with a line from Pete Seeger, and then the idea of Anthea clinging tenaciously onto all of our legs and reminding us of how we're falling down and what more that we need to do. And so please visit scholarstrike.com, and then we will also post some resources, some links in the YouTube comments after we get this up on YouTube on our Drinking with Historians channel.
And we'll be up tomorrow with a whole nother slate of people. So remember, there's a whole nother day to come. And so we'll be up, and everything will be up at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow with more videos and all of that.
Yeah. Don't forget day 2 tomorrow. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Anthea, and for Kevin for joining us, from me and Varsha, and for 180 people we had here for our webcast. Let me say thank you again, and we'll end as we do with cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.